Kenji sat at his desk, staring blankly at a bank statement, his mind racing. The numbers in front of him blurred, but one detail stood out: a large transfer to a law firm, Matsui Legal Office. Yumiko hadn't mentioned anything about it. The thought gnawed at him. Why would she keep this from him? For weeks, he had noticed small things. At first, they seemed insignificant. Yumiko working late, taking calls outside, sometimes disappearing for hours with vague explanations. She always said it was work. But lately, the excuses felt thin, and Kenji couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. He sighed and put the statement aside, but the questions wouldn't leave his mind. What was she hiding? As the days passed, Kenji's unease grew. Yumiko's behavior became more secretive. She constantly glanced at her phone, and whenever Kenji entered the room, she would quickly hide it. Conversations were shorter. Her smiles felt forced, and there was a noticeable distance between them. One evening, Kenji lay awake, Yumiko sound asleep beside him. He couldn't take it anymore. Slowly, he slipped out of bed and crept into the kitchen, where Yumiko's phone was charging. His heart pounded as he unlocked it. He knew her password. It hadn't changed. Scrolling through her messages, everything seemed normal at first. Chats with coworkers, friends, family. But then, one message caught his eye. Transfer complete. Everything's ready. His pulse quickened. Transfer? What transfer? He continued scrolling, but many conversations had been deleted. His mind raced. Was she hiding something big? He put the phone down, his thoughts in turmoil. Was his wife involved in something he couldn't imagine? The next morning, as Kenji tried to process what he had found, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Hesitant, he answered. "Kenji?" a voice said on the other end. "It's Ryo Takahashi. We need to talk." Kenji froze. He recognized the name. Ryo was the brother of Aisuke, Yumiko's ex-boyfriend who had died in a hiking accident years ago. "I know this is sudden," Ryo continued, his voice calm but firm, "but you need to be careful. Your wife isn't who you think she is. Aisuke's death wasn't an accident. Yumiko's involved in something dangerous, and you might be next." Kenji's heart sank. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I can't explain everything over the phone, but you need to start paying attention to what she's doing. Don't trust her, Kenji. She's hiding more than you know." Ryo hung up before Kenji could ask more. Kenji sat there, the phone still in his hand. Could it be true? Could Yumiko really be hiding something this serious? Kenji's mind was spinning. Ryo's words echoed in his head. Don't trust her. Over the next few days, Kenji began watching Yumiko more closely, carefully observing her every move. He tracked her whereabouts, watched how she interacted with people, and monitored her phone when she left it unattended. What he found made his stomach turn. Large amounts of money were being transferred into offshore accounts under names he didn't recognize. The amounts were staggering, and the pattern suggested that this had been going on for a while. Each transaction was meticulously hidden, routed through different countries, making it almost impossible to trace. He also noticed her calls. Late at night, Yumiko would slip out onto the balcony to make quiet phone calls. When Kenji asked her about them, she brushed him off. "Just work," she'd say, but her tone was distant and her explanations felt rehearsed. One evening, Kenji followed her. She met with a man in a quiet cafe, exchanging documents in a way that made Kenji's skin crawl. He didn't recognize the man, but the way they spoke made it clear that this wasn't a friendly meeting. Kenji's paranoia grew. He barely slept, plagued by nightmares where Yumiko stood over him, cold and emotionless, holding a knife. He woke up drenched in sweat, unable to shake the image from his mind. Yumiko suggested a trip to Hokkaido soon after. "We need a break," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just you and me. Let's get away for a few days." Kenji's gut twisted. Hokkaido? remote, isolated, far from anyone who could help. It felt like a trap. He agreed to go, but in his mind he was already planning for the worst. The trip started innocently enough. Yumiko was cheerful, almost too cheerful, and Kenji couldn't relax. Every moment felt like it could be the last time he'd see her true intentions. On the second day, Yumiko suggested they take a hike up a mountain trail. "It'll be beautiful up there," she said, her voice light, almost carefree. Kenji's heart pounded as they walked the narrow path. His eyes darted around, looking for anything that seemed out of place. But it was just the two of them, surrounded by the quiet wilderness. As they reached the edge of a cliff, Kenji couldn't take it anymore. The tension was unbearable. He turned to face her, his voice trembling. "What are you hiding from me, Yumiko? What's going on with the money, the secret phone calls? Why are we here?" Yumiko's expression shifted. She looked at him for a long moment, and then, to his surprise, she sighed deeply and sat down on a nearby rock. "I didn't want to tell you like this," she said quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. "But you deserve to know the truth." Kenji stood frozen, unsure of what was coming next. Yumiko began to speak, her words slow and deliberate. Years ago, she had been involved in a financial scheme with Aisuke. It had started as something small, something they thought they could control. But the deeper they got into it, the more dangerous it became. Aisuke had wanted to leave the life behind, to go straight and build a future with Yumiko. But Ryo wouldn't let him. Ryo had relied on Aisuke's cooperation, and when Aisuke tried to back out, Ryo killed him in a fit of rage during a hike. He had staged the accident to make it look like a tragedy, and Yumiko had been living in fear ever since. Ryo had been blackmailing her, forcing her to move money through hidden accounts, using her financial skills to cover up his crimes. The large transfers Kenji had found were part of her plan to escape Ryo's control. She had been trying to gather enough money to disappear, to take Kenji with her and start a new life far from Ryo's reach. Yumiko's voice broke as she finished. "I didn't want you to find out like this. I've been trying to protect you." Before Kenji could process everything, a rustling sound came from behind them. Kenji turned to see Ryo stepping out of the trees, his face twisted with anger. "Yumiko," he growled, his voice cold. "You weren't supposed to tell him." Kenji's blood ran cold. Ryo had followed them to Hokkaido. He had known all along. Ryo stepped closer, his eyes fixed on Yumiko. "You thought you could get away from me? You thought you could just run?" Kenji's heart raced as he moved to stand between Yumiko and Ryo. "Stay away from her," he said, his voice shaking but determined. Ryo smirked. "You don't understand, do you, Kenji? She's been lying to you this whole time. She's as much a part of this as I am." Kenji's mind spun. Who was telling the truth? Was Yumiko really innocent, or had she played him all along? Just as the tension reached its peak, police sirens echoed in the distance. Yumiko had contacted the authorities before the trip, setting up Ryo's downfall. The police arrived moments later, and Ryo's smug expression faded as he was arrested. Back in Tokyo, Kenji sat in his apartment, staring out at the city skyline. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, confusion, guilt. The woman he had once doubted had been trying to protect him all along, but the scars left by the secrets, lies, and danger were deep. Yumiko sat beside him, silent, her hand resting lightly on his. They had survived, but their relationship had been shattered by the weight of everything that had happened. As the sun set over the city, Kenji knew one thing for sure. They had a long road ahead of them, and rebuilding what had been broken would take time. But for the first time in a long time, they were free.